think we've got a great group on board today. So let's kick off. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining our Workbench Masterclass today. My name is Jessica Lynn. I'm a co-founder and partner at Workbench. We're an enterprise software VC fund based here in New York City, and we lead seed rounds in enterprise startups throughout the country. We are very proud investors in New York City companies such as Cockroach Labs, Spring Health, Catalyst, Fire Hydrant, Arthur, and many more. Now, the number one thing we are obsessed with and that we work on with our founders day in and day out is enterprise go-to-market. And that is why we launched this Enterprise Operator Masterclass series with operators from top enterprise software companies sharing their most tactical playbooks with us. Now, we've also previously covered a ton about enterprise sales at length here at Workbench, but it often feels to our enterprise stage startups, early stage startups, that marketing is this big black box, right? For almost all of our founders, there's feels like too many marketing channels that could be tapped into, whether it's outbound emails, LinkedIn, AdWords, content, and we know how overwhelming that can feel. And then on the other hand, for many of our founders, they feel like marketing is just not that scientific, right? It feels like you're just trying a lot of stuff, and then what? And this is where Ryan Narod comes in. So Ryan is a longtime marketing leader here in New York City. He's currently head of marketing at Mutiny, a Series B company backed by Insight and Sequoia, and previously was at Radar and Google. Ryan also advises many early stage startups, and what we love about his approach is how systematic he is about marketing, how there is a process and a method. And so on this masterclass, Ryan's going to talk through how to build a system for acquiring customers, how to set it up, how to scale it, and then how to measure if it's actually working or not. So get ready to take lots of notes. This is going to be super tactical with lots of examples, and we will post this recording afterward on our blog. So drop in your questions and chat throughout, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end to discuss. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Ryan Narod.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here and excited to share with you how we think about customer acquisition. And so just to kind of set an agenda for this session, what you'll learn today in this masterclass is, regardless of where you are on your journey, whether you're a founder or a first marketing hire, or you've inherited a marketing team, you know, how to think about customer acquisition holistically. So just mentioned, lots of folks view this as a black box. I'll try to break apart all the different elements of marketing and like, what do you do first, second, third, or fourth? Like just mentioned, I've been a head of marketing, but also a first marketing hire at two startups now, where I joined, you know, when the company was around 10 people. So can kind of share that perspective on what that looks like in the earliest stages and how that scales. And ultimately, once this scales, a lot of folks have questions around how do you build dashboards and how do you drive accountability amongst your teams to hit weekly metrics that drive ultimately revenue and business outcomes that you care about. So before we dive into actually decomposing the system, wanted to sort of level set on who this is for, right? Because I'm talking to a lot of founders that are pre-product market fit. I'm talking to companies that sometimes are product-led versus sales-led. So this presentation, I'll try to cover like all different aspects of how you should go about it. But the slant or the focus here will be towards companies that have product market fit. You know, my view is without it, you shouldn't be looking to scale marketing, right? Like if you're pre-product market fit, no amount of advertising is going to help, right? You should really focus on founder-led sales and nailing that until you're ready to build a repeatable product, a repeatable marketing motion. Second, many of the tactics we'll cover today are about identifying and going after high-value accounts. So if you're a product-led company, maybe a productivity tool that has a low ACV, some of this may not be as relevant. And so we'll touch on what pieces are relevant and what pieces aren't. And then most importantly, maybe this seems obvious, but you know, this is really for folks who can make time for marketing. And so if you're a solo founder, you know, marketing is a marathon, not a sprint. This isn't like this is the quarter where we do marketing, and then next quarter is the quarter where we do sales. So it's really about, when you embark on the journey of building a scalable marketing system, this is not a one and done tactic. This is a long-term investment in the future of how you're going to continue to operate the business. And so as I approach marketing as the first marketing hire, that's how I think about it, but that system can be applied to existing teams. So that's a little context setting. I want to get into the 4 steps I start to think about when I break apart, like, what does it look like to come into a company and build marketing from scratch? 4 steps here. 1 is understanding your buyer personas and your ICP. And we're going to get really tactical. Like, I know that sounds like an ambiguous thing. Where do you start to understand your buyer personas? We're going to get really tactical. How do you get there? Once you get there, you have a fundamental understanding of who you're going after, how to talk to them, what channels to talk to them on, and then you're ready to set targets. So setting targets is really important because it drives accountability towards what are you shooting for. Too many times I see companies approach marketing without a set of targets early on, and you don't know what good looks like. You don't know, if you run an event and 30 people show up, is that successful or is that not? And so setting targets, preparing data, we'll cover there. Only then is it time to activate your channels, right? And so if you've not done that foundational work, you can't just go in and start running ads. That's not going to get you far. And so we'll talk about what channels to activate and where to get started first, second, third. And then eventually it's a game of measurement and iteration. So step 3 is really taking your channels from 0 to 1. And step 4 is about 1 to 1.1 to 1.2 and really building channels that scale over time. So I'm going to dive into each of these. These will make a lot more sense as we get in. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I can't see the chat, but Jess on there is going to chime in when she sees a question that's worth clarifying, and we can make this super interactive. And I want to make sure I get really, really tactical, because the last thing everyone wants is a high level webinar on what is marketing. So I want to get really tactical into what are the things you can do today to sort of turn marketing on from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2. So starting with buyer personas, this template, this blue picture here is sort of our buyer persona template at Mutiny. And essentially, like, what this serves to do is really give you an understanding of who you're talking to, how you want to talk to them, and what are the channels that you should engage with them on. And so the best place to start with buyer personas is really just talking to your customers or your future customers. So asking them, like, how they're currently going about solving the problem that your product offers to solve. Understanding their main pain points, their day-to-day blockers, their fears, their motivations. If they're customers, why did they purchase your solution? Or if they're not customers, why have they not purchased your solution? And then alternatives that they've considered or are considering. So I won't go into, I've actually dropped on the next slide, and we'll share the recording after in the slides. But there's a whole set of questions that I think if you're really structured and you block off time in your, this is what I would do on my first week on the job, and you block off time and you start asking some of these questions, you can really understand how your different buyer personas behave. And buyer personas aren't just different titles, but they're, how does a buyer within one industry differ from a buyer within another industry? And what this is going to give you really is as you start to build out these templates for your personas, you can now start to look across personas and start to see, I just talked to, we sell into marketers. So I just talked to a dozen ABM people or demand gen people, and they all said that this was their biggest pain point. So now when we start launching our campaigns, whether they're email campaigns or events, we roughly know that when we target demand gen people, this is sort of the messaging that we need to lead with. And so I'll leave this here, take a screenshot, but we'll share the recording. These are some of the questions that I would say before you start thinking about channels. These are my go-to questions for establishing a set of buyer personas that you're going to use sort of in all of your marketing going forward. So, so you've built buyer personas. The next thing is about setting your targets. So I recommend doing this as early as possible when you're starting your marketing function. Too many marketing functions I see are driving metrics that are not tied to revenue. So whether it's things like followers or website traffic or even MQLs, like nobody really knows what that means. And so for startups, I always recommend working backwards from revenue to get to a goal that you can measure weekly and even daily. And the metric that I like to use is meetings booked. And meetings booked for me is a good metric because it's measurable on a daily basis and doesn't have external dependencies. And so if you're to, with this example here, if you're going to start at the bottom and you're responsible for the business needs to drive $1 million in ARR at a $50,000 ACV, that's roughly 20 customers at a 33% win rate. That's roughly 60 opportunities. And if for every 5 meetings you have, that's an opportunity, you need to book 300 meetings to get to $1 million in ARR. So that number you can now track. If you break down 300, which seems like a big number, you break it down by month and by week, you can now start to see, okay, to get to that $1 million in revenue, given my conversion rates, that's 25 meetings per month and that's 6 per week. And when you start breaking it down by 6 per week, that actually doesn't feel that crazy, right? That's like one to 2 a day. And you can start to build marketing programs that deliver against that. And that, if you get to Friday and you've only driven 1 meeting, you're not going to have a good week, right? And so it sort of reduces that anxiety at the end of the quarter when you're behind on pipeline or you're behind on revenue or some of these metrics into accountability that you can drive on a daily and weekly basis. So I would say that's always the start. I start with personas. I then get into a goal that I can measure weekly and even daily. And for most startups, again, if you're sales led, the meeting set number I think is an elegant one to start with. Then you go into preparing your data. So what's the point of all this persona work? Well, now you kind of know who to go after, right? What are the companies that are a good fit. You're going to learn not just the personas, but also from folks you talk to. What are the companies? What are the industries that are a good fit and not? And so I see a lot of startups start to think about their ICP as, oh, well, we're going after Series B through public companies or Series B through E companies. That's a really big list, and that's not specific enough. So I always like to ask folks, like, what are the non-obvious signals that you look at when deciding whether or not an account is a good fit? And the way I do that is I always approach my sales team and I'll say, hey, here's a prospect. Tell me if they're a good fit. And they'll instantly look at the website typically, or they'll look up who works there and they'll say, this is a good fit or this isn't a good fit. And I'll ask how and why. And you start to get to second level of details around that, where people are saying, oh, well, I check out their website and if they have a industries drop down and they sell across 7 industries, that's a good fit for our product. Or I'll look at who works there, and if they have people with this title, then they're a good fit for our product. Or I'll look at their pricing page, and if they, have this type of pricing that indicates their PLG, or there's a different pricing meter that we could sell them, then they're a good fit. So every business is different. It's hard to make a generalization. But to give you an example of like something really out there, used to lead marketing at a company called Radar. We sold into mobile apps. And the best fit customers for us were were restaurant chains like the Burger Kings and the Panda Expresses of the world that had a use case for order ahead. So the best data it wasn't obvious. This isn't data you can find in Crunchbase or Apollo. It was, are people leaving reviews on the App Store that they tried to do an order ahead and the food took too long to come out? Well, guess what? You can actually get that data. You can scrape, there are databases that will sell you data from all the app stores, and you can get all the reviews and parse out the text from there. So So all this is to say, depending on your business, there are tools like Apollo and Lead IQ that'll get you contact data. Crunchbase and LinkedIn will get you sort of firmographic data. But then there's also custom data, right? Whether it's finding a database that sells that sells data from the App Store, looking at Built With, which tells you data on technologies that companies are using, and even Upwork, like things that are really, really hard to find, like looking at the language on someone's website. If you need to ask someone offshore to go through each website one by one and build you that list, it's all doable. But this is the foundation of a really great sort of account focused program. The more non-obvious signals you can get, the better targeted you can be with your target accounts. And then we're ready to get into channels, right? So where have we been? We built out our personas and we understand who we're going after. Then we've set targets. We've broken down a really big revenue target into something that's measurable on a weekly basis. And then we've built a list of like, who are we marketing to? Like very specifically, which companies and why do we think they're a good fit? Only then do we want to talk about channels. And the way that I think about channels is actually left to right. Outbound. So if you start all the way to the left, the channels there are things that give you immediate results. They're lower volume, but they're higher value. So if you imagine yourself coming into an organization where you're now breaking down things on a weekly basis, you now have goals to hit. And too many marketing leaders join a company and are like, well, I'm going to go create some content and hope for the best 6 months from now. But if you set goals on a weekly basis and your first week, you're responsible for 6 meetings booked, then no amount of content is going to do that. It's very unlikely that you'll create the perfect blog post in week 1 that's going to drive that. So it's really important, I think, to get some wins under your belt. And so I always start with outbound, layer on paid, layer on events, layer on inbound. I will break down each of these, but just kind of thinking about a framework from the perspective of you have a number to hit, start with the channel that's going to get you results right away. So I think about outbound and paid first, because these are the meetings that when you book, you're confident that they're a good fit. This is why it's really important to build that target account list, is you know that these accounts are a good fit for X, Y, and Z reason. And again, the more signals you have that are proprietary to your business, the better you're going to be at this. So this is an example. In our target account list, we go after ABM marketers who use an ABM tool. ABM stands for account-based marketing, and 6 Sense is one of those tools. So on any given day, we can run a campaign that all we have to do is go into our list and filter for who's using 6 Sense and who has the title of ABM, right? And that's really easy to do. Again, you can, if you wanted to run a play like this, you can just go to builtwith.org and pull a list of everyone using 6 Sense. And that works for any technology that has a script on the website. And so we just pull that list and we create an email like this that is, here's why we're reaching out to you. Here's why our product is a good fit for you. And again, this comes from the persona work. Because we've talked to a dozen ABM marketers, we know what the value of a product like ours and how it fits into their lives. So really important to connect the dots here. And then, in our case, we use our own product to almost merge all the data that we've gathered on them in our target account list onto a personalized landing page. So they'll get a page like this, they'll click on the page, and the page will sort of get a lot more context on why we think that they're a good fit. So these campaigns convert really, really well for us. And again, the foundation, this is why we talked about step 1 and 2 being build your personas and build the data. If you skip that step, it becomes really hard to execute on a program like this. The next thing, so now outbound, like you've gotten that going. I actually want to add one more thing on outbound. The first thing you want to do from a paid perspective, if you're doing this outbound strategy, and this is what we do at Mutiny, is we run the same exact campaign through LinkedIn. So before you go and buy any sort of fancy paid marketing software, you can actually go and upload the same target account list that you're using for these outbound emails into LinkedIn. And you could actually send people the same campaign. So when people are receiving your campaign, they're going to get it in their email inbox and they're going to get it on LinkedIn, the same messaging, but it doubles the likelihood of them responding. So in case folks are confused on like where to start with paid, if you have a target account list and this is what your business model supports, that's always a great place to start, because you're effectively doing the same work to reach people in two places. The next thing is events. So I like to layer on, after you've done outbound and paid, I like to layer on events, and I'll explain why. I think it's a forcing function for a lot of really good stuff. But I have a sort of a framework here for how to approach events, because in theory, events can seem like this really ambiguous thing of, well, what kind of event? Events seem expensive. I'm not ready for events. I think if you start with a format that is low effort and high scale, like a virtual fireside chat or a virtual panel, it's essentially a webinar. It's like what we're doing here right now. And it becomes really easy for you to spin up. And the focus here shouldn't be on your product. The focus here should be, again, going back to those personas, what are the people that you're targeting care about? So if you've now talked to dozens of ABM people and they said, here's our pain point, well, you might actually, out of the dozen that you spoke to, 3 of them might be really good speakers, and you might want to actually put them on a webinar. So all this sort of like feeds into itself. You might want to put them on a fireside chat or a panel so they can speak about their problems and how they're approaching solving them. And their peers will want to hear from them, right? So I would say start with a format, something low effort and high scale, then focus on distribution. Just like the goals that you set for the marketing function at large, you can set goals for registrations for an event. So I'll give you an example. If you're running a panel event and for your first webinar, you want to get to 300 registrants. Well, you've got, and let's say you have 6 weeks to do so before the event. You might set a goal of, I want to get to 50 registrants a week. And that really forces you to get into this hustle mindset of how do you get there. So you can basically get into a cadence where every single week you're trying something new to get in front of your audience and get to 300 registrants. And in micro sort of goals of 50 a week, it becomes really doable. So week 1, you set a goal of 50. Well, what do? You might post on social and you'll see, does that work? Does that not? Week 2, you might do some outbound emails. Week 3, you might tap your speakers. You have 3 panelists. You might each say, hey, you're like, put this on your socials and put this in newsletters. Week 4, you might actually go and find industry newsletters that want to plug events. And you might tap your investors. So getting this distribution muscle, events actually force that to happen really fast. And you'll start to see really great success from that. And then number 3 is, okay, you've done the event, you've like learned how to put on the event. The follow-up strategy is really important. And so having a plan for how you're going to turn every registrant into a meeting. So, if you've got 300 people who show up, typically when we do this, we see 10% convert into meetings for us, but having a really solid cadence that you can follow up with the ones that are a good fit and turn them into meetings. That's always, that's always a really important part of like following through on the strategy. And as a bonus, we'll talk about this next, but events actually tend to be a really good forcing function for creating content. So I see Jess is on, so maybe there's a question.
Yeah, there's a few questions that have popped up. Actually, going back to your slide before, folks were curious about LinkedIn. And when you said paid, I think paid is a charged word. So maybe if you can break down how you describe paid. And then the double click on LinkedIn is when you say LinkedIn, did you mean LinkedIn ads, LinkedIn in messages, LinkedIn connects? Yeah. Go from there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, if I was to kind of break down paid, the reason I'm focusing on LinkedIn, you've got a few paid channels. The most, when people think of paid, the first place they go is paid search. And paid search is great, but it's really, really expensive. And my view is that unless you're in like a market that people are like desperately lining up for your product or like the problem you solve, and there's very low competition, paid search is going to be pretty expensive and is going to be a lot of volume, low quality. Outside of paid search, where people are looking for your problem, the rest of paid is essentially some version of display advertising, whether it's called paid social or actual display. And that's really targeting people with an ad when they're not looking to buy your product. And that happens either in banner ads on sites, or it happens on LinkedIn, or it happens on Facebook. The reason I say to start with LinkedIn if you're going to do paid is because LinkedIn can natively let you target B2B audiences. So it's the only platform where you can literally upload a target account list of companies. And you could say, within these companies, I want to target these titles. And it will literally serve ads to those audiences. Now, within LinkedIn, there's a few ad formats. Some of them are like native in-feed ads, which basically it's like an image with some text and a call to action. There's also an ad format, since somebody asked about InMail. There's an ad format that emulates InMail. So it basically sends a message that shows up in someone's inbox. So when I gave this example of we send an outbound email and we also run that through paid, that same message is showing up in someone's InMail. The advantage of using LinkedIn InMail over just sending LinkedIn paid InMail ads, which I know sounds really confusing, versus just sending InMail, is that there's no scale issue. So you could target the hundreds or thousands of accounts through an ad that shows up in an InMail. If you were to just InMail those people, I think you have like a limit of 30 a month or something based on your LinkedIn license. So sending InMails isn't like really a scalable marketing channel because of that limitation.
That's super helpful. I'm sure we'll have more questions on that. One last question on your next slide, because you're talking a lot about experiments and breaking it down. Would it not be more beneficial to try and run multiple experiments from week one so you can double down on the most successful channel immediately? I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to get into like this idea of I have to build a scientific, I need to overtool and try 1,000 things from day one. And you end up doing 100 things, but not doing any one thing particularly well. And so, what I would do, this is why it's really important. I keep harping on these personas that I think people just skip it and don't understand why it's important. I think you're going to start to see patterns in your persona research of this is the audience. And by audience, it's like title within this type of company. This is the audience that really cares about the problem we're solving. And that's your hypothesis. Like that's all that's where you're putting your eggs are being put in that basket. And within that, what you really want to test is what's the right format to engage them. And the whole idea is not to like overthink it and build this crazy strategy. It's just to sort of get the ball rolling. So if I was to like give a really tactical example, you're talking to a dozen demand gen people, amongst other personas, but those are the people who are really resonate with your product and the solution. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This, like, I can't go anywhere to hear this sort of relevant material. So you're like, okay, cool. I think this is interesting. Now it becomes a question. You now isolate one variable. Your audience is isolated. Now it becomes a question of what do you say to them and how do you get in front of them? And that's what this like format distribution testing becomes.
Awesome. I'm sure more questions will come up, but why don't we have you keep going? We can answer the rest a little bit later.
Okay. So I ended this slide talking about post-event content because I believe that events in the early days are a really great hack to get the ball rolling on content. Because normally, teams they're just creating a blog post because, I don't know, maybe they have an OKR to create X number of blog posts, or they think that they're onto something and this build it and they will come mindset. But an event, especially if you're bringing in other perspectives, you start to get this like authoritative voice of folks that are sort of speaking on your behalf, whether they're customers or not, that actually is more interesting to your broader audience than just what you have to say. So this is an example. We do these webinar series called Conversion Secrets Live, and we do them, I think there was one today, and we do them every 2 weeks. and we get 3 marketers on a Zoom call, and we ask them to each share some experiment that they ran that drove an increase in conversion. So it's like this super tactical series. And we have no issue. Like sometimes they're customers, sometimes they're prospects. So it also helps us get in front of prospects. And so we'll do the event, and then it's really easy to turn that event into a blog post. So we slice up the recording, and because we have 3 customers, there's 3 sections, and each one has sort of a paragraph summary. So you're already being forced to work on SEO. And then we'll continue to slice this up. So we had the event, we wrote up sort of the summary blog post. Then we have this playbook section on our website where we turn each story. So in this webinar, there were 3 companies. There was Clearbit, Marketer, Hire, Novatic. Each one we turn into a playbook, which is our version of a recipe. And it becomes a really tactical thing of, here's what Clearbit did. And if you want to do this, follow this really tactical step-by-step guide. So already now you've turned a video into a blog post and a playbook and social. So the last thing we do with it is we just chunk out every single soundbite and clip, and this becomes almost the raw material that we use to promote all of our content on social, which drives people back to either the playbook or the blog post or the video recording. And so just getting into this muscle, when you're thinking about what is inbound, how do I build inbound? I think in the early days, the events that you run are a great forcing function. If you're not able to take that and piece that apart into, at least 6 pieces of content, then you're going to have a hard time doing inbound from scratch. So this, I think, is always a good starting point, but inbound doesn't have to be just events. I wanted to add another example here. Text may be hard to see, but I just reached out to a bunch of CMOs. This was in December. And I said, hey, my team is finishing a blog post around annual planning, and we wanted to include your perspective on what marketers need to focus on next year. Can you send me a few sentences answering what will CEOs and boards expect from marketing in 2023? This was a cold email. Some of these people I knew, some of these people I didn't, but had a really good response rate because people want to be mentioned in your content. And we just wrote up a blog post, which is, here's exactly what CMOs and boards expect from marketing in 2023. This is the kind of stuff that people want to read. And it's indirectly tied with your company and your brand. People don't want to read how awesome your product is. People want to read something that will help them get better at their job within their industry. And then, a lot of sort of good social fodder comes out of that. We created cards for each quote. Each of the people who contributed shared it. So there's a really important muscle to build here around, creating content that's based on what your personas care about, and also chunking that out into follow-up content and focusing on distribution. And so, okay, so now you've done your first sort of set of content. When people think about inbound, this is the most complex channel amongst all of the ones that we've talked about. It's really, the big question is how do you iterate on inbound? And when you look at inbound, if you actually piece apart what drives inbound, if you have a target on number of inbound SQLs, which are qualified leads that come in through the website, you can actually break that apart into two sub-metrics. And for us, and I think for everyone who does this, it's number of weekly unique visitors and the conversion rate of those visitors. And we have goals against each of those every single week. So I know that if I want to get to 20 inbound SQLs this week, I need to get to 3,500 visitors, and I need 0.57% of them to convert. And I also understand the levers behind each of those. So I know that if I want to get more visitors, I need to publish more or better content, and I need to focus on the distribution of that content. If I'm getting enough visitors, but they're under converting, then I need to work on offers. And offers are essentially the things on your website that get someone to raise their hand. So maybe your only offer on your website is contact sales. Eventually you will exceed a point where the folks on your website want to contact sales, and you're going to need to start introducing other offers. So maybe it's a free consultation where they're going to get some rapport. Maybe it's a free trial. Maybe we just launched we just used a tool called Novatic to build an interactive demo on our website. So again, people who are coming to the website but are not ready to book a meeting, we want to give them an alternate offer for them to sign up and essentially get into our funnel. So anyways, this muscle, the point is to say that every single metric can be broken down. And we just covered inbound, but every single metric for all your 4 programs, inbound, outbound, paid, and events, every metric can be broken down into its levers. So, again, if you're behind on outbound, you can ask yourself, you can build similar dashboards that ask you, have I reached out to the right number of contacts? How many of them have opened and how many of them have replied? And so each of these channels, we don't need to go through all of them. It doesn't have to be a black box. It can be really clear on how the channel is performing and what are the drivers within that. So putting it all together, and I want to make sure we leave a lot of time for questions. This is sort of a glimpse of the dashboard that we look at here at Mutiny. I've got a target on SQLs, which is effectively the number of meetings that we're driving on a weekly basis, and broken down into our 4-channel inbound, outbound, paid, and events. But the way to think about this is you've got a target, break it down into something you can track on a weekly basis. So for us, it's weekly meetings. Break that target down by channel. So one example is weekly inbound meetings, and then break that channel down into its leading indicators. And so when you're behind, it doesn't have to be a mystery. You can start to dig into, okay, we're behind on revenue. Is it because we drove less meetings? Okay, cool. We drove less meetings. Is it because which channel was underperforming? And when a particular channel is underperforming, which lever do we need to attack? So again, turning this mystery of marketing into something where you have precision around what lever to focus on. So almost done, but this wouldn't be a customer acquisition class if we didn't talk about marketing tooling, because the number one question I get is like, what should be in my stack? And my answer is always like, don't get too many tools. There's so many vendors that will promise you like, buy our tool and you're doing marketing. And especially early on, there's no silver bullet. No tool is going to do marketing for you. If you're early on, HubSpot does 99.9% of what you need. It is like, it just doesn't get enough credit. If you're really early stage, they'll give you like 99% off. This is not sponsored by HubSpot in any way, but the breadth of what that thing can do for almost every marketing team, it's basically 1,000 tools rolled up into one. And when you're ready to scale, like there are specialized tools that do what HubSpot does, but specific to their domain a little bit better. So within Outbound, when you're ready to scale an outbound program, I find Apollo is really great because it integrates contact data together with the outbound email sending tool. So you don't need to go and buy a bunch of separate tools and try to integrate them. Really easy to use and gives you sort of one pane of glass to do all of your outbounding and finding contacts. For paid, tool called Primer. What this does is actually let you sort of push audiences to paid social dynamically. So LinkedIn does have native targeting, but once you start scaling into targeting on Facebook and some of these other platforms that only have native firmographic targeting capabilities, Primer will basically associate a business email address that you're trying to target with a personal profile of a Facebook user or an Instagram user and start to serve them ads so that you could serve B2B ads in B2C sort of advertising platforms. Next one is events. As you do live webinars and things like that, what we find Livestorm is really easy to get started, but Zoom webinars, if you're comfortable with that, this is what we're using for today's session. And then inbound, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a plug to Mutiny. So we essentially give marketers the control over that second lever of growth. So first lever being, you're now driving all this traffic to your website. Once you start iterating on, are people converting on your website? It becomes really hard to do that without a tool like Mutiny. So not for everyone. If you're early, probably doesn't make sense, but all these tools are sort of, once you get to the next step in your marketing scaling journey. So that's all I've got. I want to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Ryan. This is so awesome. And we have a very bumping chat at the moment. We have people giving feedback on different platforms to one another. But let me go through a few of the really great questions that came in. One question was around fine-tuning your engine to ensure that the highest percent of inbounds actually match who you want to sell to. So I know you talked a lot about ICPs, but how do you make sure what's coming in is actually matching that?
Yeah. This will take a little bit of iteration, but I would say that you want to remove as much friction as possible in your inbound flows, while also not creating a lot of noise for your sales team. And by remove friction, like what I'm really talking about is, and we do this on the Mutiny site, if you want to request a meeting, you're not filling out a form, waiting 48 hours for an SDR to contact you only to tell you you're a fit or not a fit to schedule a meeting. Like, that's a lot of friction. That's a bad buying experience. And so we're popping up like a Calendly or a Chili Piper calendar right away if you're a good fit. And so what those tools let you do is you can ask questions. So as an example, Mutiny is a good fit for customers that have at least 20,000 monthly visitors on their website. So we'll ask on our web form, do you have over 20,000 or do you have under 20,000? If you have under, we'll say, sorry, we're not a good fit, contact us later. If you're over, like, we want to remove all the friction from your buying experience, and we'll just get you directly to the rep that owns that account. So I think optimization is a ongoing effort, but you want to sort of start to think about it with how do you remove as much friction for your best fit accounts, while also giving your not a good fit accounts a good experience with your brand, because they'll come back around later.
Awesome. Here's one more, which is about selling to one type of audience or segment. So it seems like so far this playbook is really good if you're one ICP. What do you think about companies that are more horizontal platforms, right, that are trying to target many segments, sales, customer success, HR?
Well, I think this whole process is actually repeatable. And so, like, these steps 1 through 4 that I walk through, you're just going to want to repeat it for a different segment. So, I think the trap you can try to fall into is like, what is my lowest common denominator of messaging and campaigns that resonate with everyone? But even companies that are a horizontal solution, like, you should be able to hone in on your ICP, or like, what are the segments of buyer personas that are first most important, second most important, and third most important, and start somewhere. Like, don't try to solve for everybody. Start somewhere and just repeat the process again as you're, kind of testing down a second hypothesis.
Awesome. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but that's only because you covered so much. For outbound LinkedIn ads, what type of messaging do you recommend using, right? Focusing on the problem, what the ICP cares about, the value props, and what level of personalization do you think is needed?
So the challenge with LinkedIn ads is you can't get that personalized. You can't do this on a one-to-one level like you can with email. So it's all about, what is the largest segment that you can pull together. This is about one-to-many. What's the largest group of people you can pull together where your first line will feel as personalized as possible? And this is why I think the level of like persona times vertical is kind of a good one, because you can reach out and say, I'm reaching out to you because you're this title at this type of company. And so that sort of builds this instant, like, they understand me. The next line needs to be about the value of your product. Here's how I can help you solve your biggest problem, which I think is X. You're going to get all that from your persona work. But I think the trick is, like, how do you isolate a segment where you can be specific enough and call out a problem that they're having without being so high level and generic where it feels like just an ad that was served to everyone.
Awesome. Here's one, and I know we've dealt with this before, you and I. How do you avoid getting tagged as spam when using Apollo, or just spam issues in general, I think?
Um, I kind of, I don't like when people sort of get into like the tactics immediately of like, I need to go whitelist my domain and this and that. Like, I genuinely think if you are approaching this correctly, you will never fall into the spam trap. And what I mean by that is if you go out and you email thousands of people with like super generic messaging that sounds spammy, like people will report you as spam and you'll get shut down. But if you really are thoughtful about building segments that have enough in common, so you're using this technology, you're this title, you have this pain, we can solve your pain, like you're going to get very, very few spam reports. And in fact, you're going to get more opens and replies that will offset that. So that'll train the algorithm that your emails are good. And so we do outbound at pretty massive scale, like 1,000 emails a week per BDR that we have at least. We've never, and now two companies, never fallen into the spam trap because we're just thoughtful about sending emails that you and I as marketers would, as potential customers, like to receive. So just put yourself in the shoes of someone receiving your email. If you would mark it as spam, then someone else will mark it as spam. If you would reply to this email and think it's actually valuable and this company is solving a problem that you're facing, you're going to reply, which is ultimately going to bode well for spam purposes.
Awesome. And we have Alex here asking one of my favorite questions, which is, do BDRs live within marketing or sales, in your opinion? Because one of the questions above is also about cold calling. So I'm curious if cold calling fits it within your world and your opinion of it.
So I've always had BDRs as part of marketing, and that is because it creates an environment where marketing can have full accountability for the pipeline that the business needs. And it doesn't become a fight of who sourced it. Like, did they come from an event? And how do you think about attribution? Like, I never want to get into the attribution war. And so at the end of the day, at Mutiny, BDRs touch every single meeting, regardless of the channel it was sourced, whether it was cold outbound sourced or it was sourced from an event or it came inbound through the website. And at the end of the day, like, my team can be held accountable for the pipeline that the business needs. And so it creates this really nice alignment of incentives where we don't want to actually generate so many meetings where our BDRs are overwhelmed with spam, with calls that are a waste of time. We want to generate just the right amount of high quality meetings so that our BDRs are effective and productive, so that they're passing the pipeline that's needed to the business. So I like to do it, but I know that's a polarizing topic that tends to sometimes be political at organizations.
Awesome. A few more. What is your approach to setting event registration targets if you're running an event for the first time?
Think about it's a hard question to answer because you don't have like a good benchmark.
Yeah.
But I like to think about what will you be working backwards from what will you be happy with from a number of attendees live perspective. So like, will you be happy if you do all this work for a webinar and like 10 people show up live? Like, it's not going to feel great for you or for your speakers or that kind of thing. So, typical benchmarks is like roughly a third of the people who register show up live. So if you're going to work backwards from that and you feel good about, 100 people showing up live, like that feels like a pretty substantial event, 100 people taking their time, then you're going to want to set your registration goal to 300. There's no hard and fast rules here. But I always work backwards from like, what will I feel good about from a live attendance perspective, and then apply the 33% show up rate.
Awesome. Here's one more. I'm curious what role you think a marketer should have in an outbound campaign, leading the execution of it, the content messaging creation, and what part should sales have in that campaign too?
So I sort of view, this depends if the BDR team sits as part of marketing or sales. If it sits as part of marketing, I sort of view the BDR function as it's a marketing channel. It's like one-to-many campaigns. And the only difference is rather than sending it through an email automation tool, we're sending it through a sales automation tool. But the advantage of having marketing, BDR sit as part of marketing is that we can be in full control over delivering value with every touch point. So, I like to avoid these just following up emails. We have this treasure trove of stuff and offers in marketing, whether it's an event that we're hosting or a dinner or a white paper or an ebook. And just by like centralizing all of that, we can now actually think about what is the right touch point. What is the right touch point to include an offer? So things like a dinner are fairly expensive for us on a per head basis, but by having sort of marketing and control of the messaging, we can actually control what are we saying to these people, so that product marketing hat that you're wearing, and when are you injecting the right offer. And so anyways, I always like to, if BDR is part of marketing, you can have that full control. If it's part of sales, it's a little bit harder, but you try to sort of influence and build sequences such that the things that you're building in marketing actually get used.
Awesome. Okay. And I know we are almost out of time, but I will ask one last tactical question, which is, what is your BDR to AE ratio?
This depends on your ACV, but typically I've seen like 3-to-1 being like a good benchmark. You're going to want, it depends if like your enterprise reps who have a higher quota are paired with enterprise BDRs at like more of a 2-to-1 ratio. And then as you go down market, you'll increase that ratio. So small ACVs will have one BDR supporting more AEs, but the benchmark I see is 3-to-1.
Amazing. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much, Ryan, for such an awesome masterclass. I personally found your specific examples so helpful. And thank you to everyone for your great questions. I see in chat just tons of people sharing advice and resources. So thank you for that. We will be posting this recording and entire playbook online. So make sure you're signed up to our Enterprise Weekly newsletter at Workbench to receive. And if you are a pre-seed or seed stage enterprise startup, want to chat through this go-to-market engine and flywheel, we here at the Workbench team are happy to chat. So reach out to us at vc@workbench.com. And lastly, if you thought today's masterclass was helpful, we have many more playbooks on our blog and on our website. So go check it out. And so with that, thank you so much again, Ryan, for today. And thank you everyone for joining us. And we will see you next time.